It's Friday, and not just another Friday, an historic Friday. And welcome to the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. How you doing today, Jared?
Well, I think I know what we're going to talk about, and
Yeah.
that didn't require any pre-gaming, so.
No, it didn't. So why don't we just jump into it? Okay. So, President found guilty in a court of law on 34 counts, felonies. First president, former president, uh, uh, convicted of felonies. We're in uncharted waters here, and we're not legal experts. What we do is public opinion, and so that's what we'll kind of limit ourselves to. I have some early thoughts, and early thoughts that I will confine to the short term. I know in chatting with you and seeing a few of your public comments that you have kind of waxed about the longer term. You're going to feel free to do whatever you want. But in any event, let me get started on the short term. So, we know that in the past, whenever there have been legal issues and controversies, that the former President Trump has generally gained from them. He's been able to rally his base, project a sense of martyrdom, and here I am, every man just like you, being shot down by the system. On the other hand, what we also know is what voters have told us, either during the primaries or in polls, that if the president is convicted of a crime, that there are a substantial number, as many as a third of those who actually voted in the Republican primaries, and as many as 20% of independents who have said they would be less likely to support Trump if that were the case. We'll have to see how that plays out. I think the timing is very important here. And this is the sort of thing that I don't know that too many people pay close attention to. And that is that if we look at the polls right on up to the minute of the jury's decision, what we find is that the two candidates, major candidates, have been converging. The Real Clear Politics average has Trump leading by 0.9, which means that in the last several polls, Trump's lead has either declined or, as we saw in the very last poll published right before the decision by Marist, that not only was Biden leading Trump by 2 points, but actually it had reached 50%, 50 to 48. And this is in the two-way race. And so here's my sense that timing really matters. Had either of the candidates been leading by 4, 5, 6, 10 points, I don't think we'd feel much of a blip. I don't see under any circumstances this verdict helping Donald Trump with key swing voters. And so I would venture a guess that he'd go down a few points, particularly among independents. But given where the polls stand and the fact that Trump going down a few points or even Biden gaining a couple points or the combination of both, you have the potential for a lead switch here. And I think that's probably, I'm speculating, probably what's going to happen here. First spate of polls are going to show Trump going down a few points, mainly among independents, mainly among group we're watching closely, double haters, very possibly among suburban moms, swing voters. Biden not necessarily gaining any points, just watching Trump go down a few points. But the narrative that emerges in the first week or so is something along the lines of Trump hurt, Biden gets his sea legs, even though that's probably an overstatement. But that Biden kind of is the beneficiary of this. That's how I see it. I think this is uh, not orchestrated in any way, but perfectly timed so that just as Biden hits 50%, closes the gap with Trump, something happens with Trump and knocks him down a little bit, at least temporarily. That's my short-term view. I can wax long-term, but I want to hear from you first.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into long term. I'm actually just going to respond to a number of points and then build on the notion of the short term, looking at polling and psychology. But first things first, of course, what we have to see that is going to be a major determining factor in all of this is how is Trump going to respond over the next week? Will he devolve completely, or will he masterfully spin it? But of course, I think if you hate Trump, you're probably going to think the former, that he's going to be disgusting and he's going to be representative of a further devolution of his character. And of course, if you're a fan, you're probably thinking that he's going to brilliantly work this in his favor. But for people like you and I who observe this independently and do a pretty good job of doing it objectively and without emotion, I think that's very important for us to look out at the next week is how he utilizes this in his attempt to build the momentum. That's absolutely paramount and key, and that will reflect in the polls. That's the backdrop. Some other things that you mentioned, you touched upon the exit poll. Now, that's a fascinating question. When they asked in the exit polls, would a conviction, a guilty verdict, impact their likelihood to vote? And the results even showed among Republicans that a significant amount of them would actually be turned off about that. Now, what we don't know is what was the context when they asked that question back then of the guilty verdict. Now, if it had been something regarding treason or something that really could shake the foundations of our democracy, I think most respondents would probably trust that question would really deal with something egregious. But I do think we know that a lot of the public, I don't know what percent, but a significant enough of the public, both MAGA voters and non-MAGA voters, could think that this whole thing is ridiculous. Just the notion of a court and a porn star and hush money. I just have to question, what percent of voters actually really care about this particular trial. Now, maybe there are other trials that would affect that. Maybe the upcoming one in Georgia, different story. That could definitely be a factor. But this one, I don't know if a majority of Americans are even intensely into this, legal drama. A lot of them, including myself, think it's ridiculous. Just the whole nature of it is clownish. So there's that. About the Real Clear Politics average in showing that Trump is only 1%, or more specifically 0.9 of a percentage point ahead of Biden. I mean, we know that this comes down to the battleground states, right? Mm-hmm. We have for many election cycles been in more or less a 52-48, 53-47, and even 51-49 races in regarding the national average. But again, this is going to come down to the battleground states. And, my glancing at the polls over the last week or so, a decisive number of polls are showing Trump ahead in the key battleground states and beyond the margin of error. That's the ... asterisk point, that we're not talking ahead a point or two, we're talking 4, sometimes even 5, whether it's Arizona, Georgia, sometimes Pennsylvania, not Michigan. Michigan tends to be more of a contender state up in the air. But that's a key point there in terms of determining who's really ahead. And then the last thing I'll say is, we can look at numbers right now and some numbers that we have, because naturally we want to know where is this going. And so we can use data and combine it a little bit with psychology. Not that we're psychologists, but the fact that we study people, values, and opinions kind of lends itself to our having to understand some basic psychology. And so what I want to talk about is favorable ratings, the most recent that we have. And this is, from a few weeks ago. But more or less, these things tend to have remained continuous and constant. But a little of a bit of a deep dive into the favorable, unfavorable ratings of the two, and star this and highlight this: favorability does not equal electability. It's a very important factor, but is not 1-to-1 or apples to apples when comparing to electability. But nonetheless, it reveals intensity, and intensity is very key in this particular moment. So Joe Biden, and let's break this down by party, because this is very revealing. The favorable, unfavorable scale is a Likert scale, and polling respondents are asked whether they're very favorable, somewhat unfavorable, very unfavorable, do not have enough information to make a judgment, or not sure. And the immediate thing when we look at this by party is I want to see very favorable, because those are your intense crowd. That's your very much like crowd. And so Joe Biden gets a 42.5, 42.5 very favorable rating from within his party. Somewhat favorable, a little bit lukewarm favorable, which could shift to the other side, and not all of them, but a percentage of them. 37.2. So you combine that, and you get 80% within his party find him favorable. Of the 80%, 42.5 intensely like him. Let's compare that with Trump. And remember, this wasn't too long ago. This was only a few weeks ago. Donald Trump within the Republican Party has a 53.5 very favorable rating. That is very important. That's over 10 percentage points higher than Joe Biden. That signals there's more intensity within the Republican Party in terms of their like for their guy. 28.6, somewhat favorable. You put those two together and you get 82%. So when you put the two together, 82% favorable Republicans, that is, towards Trump, 80% towards favorable towards Biden regarding the Democrats. But drilling down to the intensity, 53.5% very favorable towards Trump, that is Republicans, versus 42.5. Now, we tie this in to this current guilty verdict, and the question becomes who benefits. I suspect that, I could say conservatively, I don't think that very favorable camp is going to bleed, is going to experience attrition. I think those folks are with Trump, and they're there to stay with Trump for the long haul. The question is the somewhat favorable camp within the Republican Party. Will they move over into the martyr camp? The martyr camp, of course, are those who are very favorable. And then the same question for the Democrats. Something tells me I don't know that Biden and his very favorable camp grow from this. I do think Democrats temporarily feel that there's a win. I say temporarily because I don't think that that's long lasting, because that's not Biden having done anything, right? That's that particular justice system that ruled that. I do think a lot of Democrats will feel vindicated. I do think that they're happy about this, but I do sense that this will wear off, but I don't think it will grow the popularity of the president. On the other hand, I do think the martyr camp within Trump voters remains the same. What I don't know is whether it grows. What I do know is this: there is a cross-cultural fact when we're talking about the psychology of martyrdom, that whoever the person is, whether it was bin Laden, or whether it was some Iranian leader that was uh, killed, or like what happened during the Trump presidency, all going back all the way to saints and other religious revered figures. We do know that Trump has that type of following. He does have an intense following. Something tells me, because of the psychology of martyrdom, that the intense camp, while they may not grow in numbers, they will grow in intensity, and they will become even greater ambassadors of the MAGA movement. I'll leave it there.
Okay, and I'm just going to make a couple of brief final comments. The first is as you've pointed out, but I really want to underscore. It's one thing to ask if Trump were convicted of a felony, would you, change your vote? The question is this the right kind of conviction for the right kind of felony? This was a case where the cast of characters couldn't be conjured up, by Hollywood. Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, David Pecker, just a tawdry, sleazy bunch of people. Sorry, I don't mean to libel anyone. I'm just reporting the words that I've seen. But so is this the right conviction to change people's minds? My final point is you have done a very good job addressing the favorable intensities. And I don't think that there's anything in any of this that raises Joe Biden's numbers. I think those are fairly well locked. And the only thing that could possibly move them is, as I've termed before, a deus ex machina, something very big that rallies folks to the president. But what we haven't addressed are the very unfavorable folks. And that's the thing. Our scale also includes somewhat unfavorable to Biden and to Trump, very unfavorable to Biden and Trump. And so the key group that I'm going to be watching are the somewhat unfavorables to Trump, to see if some of those are actually move into the more intense negative crowd. But in sum, my final analysis is, I think it's fair to speculate that you'll see Trump go down a couple of points, meaning that at this point in time, without Biden moving at all, and Biden being in the higher mid to the higher 40s, that you're going to see Biden grabbing a short-term slight lead. And I think that's pretty much where I'll leave my comments.
I'll just say I don't know. I really don't know. I could see that happening. I could also see it not happening. So I'm not going to predict either way. Not implying that you're making a prediction. You are offering your hunch. But to answer your question about the very unfavorables, I may as well give that data while I have it here. And what we find within the party, the Democratic Party, of Democratic voters regarding their very unfavorable opinion of Joe Biden totals to 7.6%. And then on the Trump side, this is interesting, 8.9% of the Republican Party have rated him. So that's about 1.3 percentage difference between the Republicans, who have that slightly higher, very unfavorable view of their guy, versus Biden, but really at the end of the day, they're about the same.
Yeah. And it's the somewhats that we're going to be watching. Okay. So it happened. This is, a very significant day in American history. I don't think we're going to have parades in communities. Not in the future. I hope we don't have parades in communities right now. I hope there's some soul searching that goes on, but that's our offering, real and unscripted, as always. Let us know what you think, folks. We hear from you from time to time, but we'd certainly like to hear a lot more from you. Jer, how do they get in touch with us? What's the best way to respond?
Well, they can always directly email us. You're John at johnzogbystrategies.com. I'm Jeremy at johnzogbystrategies.com. And then, of course, you can get this delivered to your inbox. A lot of the folks are getting this through SoundCloud and through Apple Podcast and YouTube. But if you actually want this delivered straight to your email inbox, go to www.johnzogbystrategies.com and click on the podcast link. Also, you could go to the contact link, and there's a subscribe button there. You put in your email, you get it delivered to your inbox. But then also on Twitter, see what's going on X, I should say. Our handle at Zogby Strategies.
Hey, have a good week.
Have a good one.
Thanks.